their view was that this was such an outlandish story, and to think that I'm alive after all that, it's not possible.
The crime had been so implausible and so absurdly cruel that the cops just wouldn't buy it. That freed up Lugo, Doorbal, and the rest of the Sun Gym gang to spend Schiller's stolen money.
They're very confident. You know, they're living in Schiller's house. They're driving his cars. They're wearing his jewelry. They took his furniture from his house and moved it into each of their apartments. They started going to strip joints with all of his money.
They bought electronics and sex toys and spent a fortune on clothes. They were having a great time on his money.
They were finally living the good life, la vida loca as it were, but their greed was insatiable. So Lugo and Doorbal decide to look for a new mark. This time, it wasn't the Sun Gym that would connect the dots. It was their favorite flesh palace, a swanky strip club called Solid Gold.
Noel Doorbal sitting there with one of his stripper girlfriends. They're going through a photo album, and he sees this guy in a picture. And he says to her, "Who is this guy?" And she said, "Oh, that's my ex-boyfriend, Frank Griga. He's a really nice guy. He made all his money on 976 numbers. He's very wealthy." Immediately, the lights go on in that head of his, and he's thinking, this could be our next victim.
Frank Griga's made a lot of money doing phone sex lines and drives a Lamborghini and has a home in Golden Beach, which is a very wealthy oceanfront community. And he looks to these guys like the perfect pigeon.
He was approached by these two people who acted like genuine businessmen and had a proposition which he was considering. Frank really had a very weird feeling about these two people. I think he was naive in a way. It was very hard for him to say no to people.
And the plan was, do the same thing you do with Schiller, take all their money, take their house, take their cars, take all their assets, and then get rid of them just like you tried to do with Schiller.
But unlike the Schiller kidnapping, Lugo and Doorbal were bold, or dare I say stupid enough to be seen meeting with Griga before they jumped him.
Lugo and Doorbal invited Griga and his girlfriend out to dinner. They invited them to a restaurant that they knew was going to be closed. It was across the street from Doorbal's apartment. So when they get to the restaurant and it's closed, they decide to go to Doorbal's apartment instead.
The gang had added a new play to their torture and extortion handbook. They would sedate the couple with, get this, horse tranquilizer, while forcing them to sign over their millions. But first, they'd have to separate the couple and immobilize them.
Noel Doorbal tells Frank, "Why don't you come back into my room? I can show you my computer setup." And Danny Lugo stays with Christina in the living room.
Hey, I gotta show you something. I like that.
But all of a sudden, they can hear just pounding on the walls, and there's clearly a scuffle in the bedroom. When he first grabbed him, Frank resisted, tried to break away. Christina screams. Danny Lugo immediately tackles her and injects her with horse tranquilizer. Unfortunately, in the struggle, Noel Doorbal kills Frank Griga.
Even though Griga was dead at that point, they still had his girlfriend, who, although drugged, was still alive. So they began to try to wake her up and get the security code for his house. She began to scream again. They shot her with more horse tranquilizer. They repeatedly tried over a period of hours to get the security code from her. And then eventually she died of too much horse tranquilizer. It was enough to kill several horses. What began as a kidnapping and extortion plot ended up in murder.
The gang realized they had to get rid of the victims quick. Their plan was to move the bodies to a warehouse to do their dirty work.
They took a trip to Home Depot to purchase some grisly items to dismember the bodies. They bought an axe, a chainsaw, some rags.
They try to basically cut Christina's head off, and the chainsaw gets tangled among the hair, and it just doesn't work. So they go return the chainsaw. They actually take their receipt and go back with the chainsaw so that the clerk at the Home Depot can remember them even more. So they end up doing all of their work with an axe. They chop off Frank and Christina's heads, hands, and feet. because they want anything that could possibly identify them to be separated from the rest of the body. And they take a big knife and they pry their teeth out of their head to make sure that dental records can't identify them. And they go down Alligator Alley and they take these big painter buckets with the body parts in it and they toss them into these drainage ditches. They take the rest of the bodies and they stuff them into oil barrels with some gravel or asphalt to weigh it down, and they seal them and dump them in drainage ditches in the south end of the county.
They disposed of the bodies. Now they just had to get rid of Griga's yellow Lamborghini.
The Lamborghini is found in a very remote area of the county, and that's really when police get involved. An abandoned Lamborghini probably means somebody disappeared not of their own free will.
Frank and Christina's friends start to talk about they were going to dinner with these bodybuilders. The names Lugo and Doorbal come up, and all of a sudden it's like a light switch comes on. A detective puts it together and goes, wait a minute. Those are the guys that Marcelo Schiller told us kidnapped him. And all of a sudden, this whole house of cards falls apart.
Bodybuilders, kidnapping, missing persons. It was too much of a coincidence to be ignored. Finally, detectives take a fresh look at the Schiller case.
On June 1st, I received a telephone call from Major Al Harper. And he said, well, I just overheard a conversation in homicide about a missing couple somehow being connected to the Sun Gym. Thank God Al Harper recalled some of the details that I gave him 4 months ago.
Police quickly arranged to interview the one man who had felt the pain of the Sun Gym gang and survived.
I get a call from Metro-Dade Police, and they say they've got a similar case. Would I be willing to come to Miami again and talk to them about my case? And I said, yeah, I'll come back and I'll talk to you.
The police had what they needed. They had all the evidence in the Schiller case, and it was like a blueprint for the Griga case.
The suspect used the same pattern as they did in the earlier abduction of the Argentine. It's possible that these two people are being held at a mini warehouse or a residence.
Desperate to find the couple before it's too late, cops race against the clock to search various gang members' homes.
They find an awful lot of Mark Schiller's stuff just lying around people's apartments. They'd cleaned out Mark Schiller's house thoroughly, and a lot of his personal effects, even things that weren't big ticket items, a lot of those wound up around their homes.
Once they do search Noel Doorbal's apartment, they start finding evidence. They end up finding traces of blood using luminol. They're able to find traces of blood on the walls and on the floors, and it starts to really appear like a serious crime scene.
But with the killers still on the loose and the victims nowhere to be found, will police have enough evidence to shut down the Sun Gym gang once and for all? Miami police finally have enough evidence to make arrests in the Griga-Furton disappearance, thanks to the evidence provided by Marcelo Schiller and Ed Du Bois. Doorbal, Delgado, and Lugo are found and hauled in.
Sir, you're charged with attempted first-degree murder, armed kidnapping, armed robbery, and burglary to a residence, and extortion.
Court finds probable cause, no bond.
Once in police custody, Lugo cooperates, but only so far. He gives up the location of the barrels containing some of the body parts.
What Danny Lugo did was he took him to the part of the county where he had dropped the torsos and not the identifying hands or face or feet.
And in the torso of the female are breast implants. And through checking the serial number and her medical history, they link those particular implants to her.
I came in the second week of June, and the two homicide detectives were waiting for me at the gate as I was coming out of the plane. And they told me that they found the bodies. So that was the end. Before that, when I boarded the plane, we were still hoping that he might be alive, but that was the end of it.
The Schiller kidnapping and the Griga-Furton murder had all been part of the gang's gruesome business plan to make money by any means necessary. Finally, It was time for the Sun Gym gang to face justice.
When the case came to me, it had many defendants. Most of them pled out. Most of them entered into a plea agreement to testify as state's witnesses.
Prosecutors single out Delgado as the weakest link and the best state's witness. After all, it was Delgado whose murky business relationship with Schiller had sparked the first kidnapping and extortion scheme.
George was the glue that held a lot of this together, and they decided to go ahead and offer him the 15 years, which I think he readily took, and he became a very important witness to tie a lot of these events together.
Duval had him in a headlock and twisting his neck and was killing him.
Prosecutors had to let one fish off the hook in the hopes that they could fry the bigger ones.
I ended up trying 3 individuals together, Daniel Lugo, Noel Dorbal, and John Carl Meese. And they were the 3 most culpable of all the defendants. The indictment was so large, it took me an hour just to read the indictment to the jury.
I don't think I ever imagined that they were going to go to jail for what they were doing. They actually thought they could do it and just get away with it. They slapped me, they hit me, they shocked me with a taser, baseball bat, butt of a gun.
After months of damning testimony and gory evidence, Lugo and Dorbal finally faced justice for the crimes they committed in the name of the 7th deadly sin: greed.
Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of first-degree murder.
Even Meese, the accountant who notarized the financial transfers, would be convicted of murder.
Guilty of first-degree murder.
If Marcelo Schiller was feeling any sense of satisfaction at that moment, it was to be very short-lived.
When I'm walking out of the court, I see 3 people behind me, and they tell me you're under arrest. At that point, I didn't even know what's going on.
It seems Delgado ratted out Schiller to the prosecutors. He told them that the Medicare billing business he bought from him was crooked. After all he'd been through, Schiller himself ended up serving 2 years in prison for fraud.
The government first ignored me because they couldn't believe anything. Then used me because they needed me for the case. And when they didn't need me anymore, they disposed of me.
It was the final twist in a twisted tale of greed.
What they lacked in morals, they made up for in greed. Nothing seemed to be below them. Their North Star was acquiring money, and they just seemed to have no floor below which they wouldn't go to do it.
Human beings are capable of anything. There are people who, because of greed, they're willing to do whatever it takes for them to get their way.
Half my soul has been taken with him, and this is something nobody really understands. The pain is there, and it really will never go away.